My name is L.J. Stambuk, and I'm the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. Thank you for coming and welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the World Affairs Council of Charlotte Speaker Series program with General David Petraeus, the Commander of the United States Central Command. I would also like to welcome Ms. Holly Petraeus and the General, and to thank you for finding time in your very busy schedule to come to Charlotte and join us here at the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. At this time, I would like to recognize the sponsors of today's program. The ambassador sponsor is the Goodrich Corporation, corporate patron, Ranger International Services Group. Corporate sponsors, Arriva, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Odell International, General Dynamics Armament and Technical Products, Queen's University of Charlotte, Wachovia Bank, a Wells Fargo company. I would also like to thank the steering committee, Rick Cantwell, Doug DeMoss, and Robert Holcomb. At this point, I would like to recognize the World Affairs Council of Charlotte board members. Thank you all for your hard work and all you're doing to promote our mission. Please stand. I would also like to recognize some of today's guests. The Honorable Anthony Fox, the Mayor of the City of Charlotte. The Honorable Jennifer Roberts, Chairman of the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners and former Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. I would again like to recognize Ms. Holly Petraeus, General Petraeus' wife, and again, thank you for coming to Charlotte. Marshall Larson, President, Chairman, and CEO of Goodrich Corporation. Steve Towns, CEO, Ranger International. Bob Holcomb, Chairman of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. Bob Morgan, President and CEO of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. Rick Cantwell, President, Odell International. Tony Zeiss, President of CPCC. Mike Hawley, partner, K&L Gates. I would also like to recognize Pamela Davis, President of Queen's University. And finally, John Falconberry, who is the President of the USO of North Carolina. I would now like to invite Anthony Fox, the Mayor of the City of Charlotte.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone. I'm just very pleased on behalf of the citizens of our city to welcome General Petraeus and Mrs. Petraeus to our city. North Carolina is home to so many thousands and thousands of young men and young women who give their service to our country. And General, I just want to say in a personal way how much I'm proud of the service you have rendered to our country in helping us through some very, very difficult circumstances, particularly in Iraq, and helping to guide the efforts there that have led to a much more stabilized country. Your efforts are ones that all of us in this room are very proud of, and we want to thank you for that. Now, that was my way of buttering the general up, because the other piece of this area is that we talk a lot about areas of our economy that are very strong, and we know financial services are a strong part of our economy, but there are actually a lot of our partners in the private sector that service our defense sector. And General Petraeus, I think as you get around our community and get to see some of the wonderful work that's being done by people who live here to support the efforts that you and others in the military need, we want to make sure we showcase Charlotte as a place that is working hard for the defense of our country as well, and we look forward to sharing more of those stories as we go along. So I welcome you here and look forward to your remarks, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Roberts.
Good afternoon. I just want to add, on behalf of Mecklenburg County, my welcome as well on behalf of the 950,000 residents who are in Mecklenburg County to General Petraeus and his wife and other folks here supporting this program today. The defense of our country is of utmost importance. We do have numerous men and women living here in this state who have dedicated their lives to the service of our country. And there is nothing I can say that will be appropriate to thank them enough for that service. So I'd like a round of applause for our men and women in all of our armed services. And many of you here today have served our country in that way. Mecklenburg County has almost 60,000 veterans living here. Our county has the largest Veterans Services office in the state. We take it very seriously. We want to support our military families both here and abroad. We want to support the active duty servicemen and women and those they leave behind. And so we have worked very hard to connect county services to the needs that we know are specific to those children and those spouses who are dealing with loved ones who are away for long, long times with a great deal of uncertainty. So once again, we appreciate so much your service. We absolutely are a region and a state that supports our military. We are honored by your presence here today. And if we can ever be of service here in Mecklenburg County, please let us know. We will continue to be a strong supporter of all the men and women to whom we owe so much. Thank you so much, General Petraeus, for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Roberts.
I'm honored to have been asked by the World Affairs Council of Charlotte to introduce today's speaker, General David Petraeus, Commander of the United States Central Command. As a regional center for education and discussion of international relationships, the World Affairs Council seeks to provide leadership and global thinking. So it's fitting that we have someone who's experienced in world affairs to speak to us today as General Petraeus. Before I introduce the General, I would like to thank Bob Holcomb, Chairman of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte and the current board chair, and L.J. Stambuk, Executive Director of the Council, for the opportunity to allow me to introduce the General today. It gives me great pleasure that Goodrich has been able to sponsor today's event and that I'm able to introduce the General because as a leading supplier to the global aerospace and defense industry, Goodrich produces a broad range of systems and products to support our warfighters. It also gives me great personal pride to introduce the General because I happen to have graduated from the same institution his at West Point, and so on behalf of the other West Point graduates at the head table, we're so glad to have you here. A bit of background on the General. He was appointed to his current position as Commander of U.S. Central Command in 2008. In his role, he oversees the U.S. military activities in the Middle East. His involvement in the Middle East began when he led his unit, the 101st Airborne Division, when Operation Iraqi Freedom began in 2003. He later took charge of rebuilding and returning Iraq's army before being appointed to command U.S. forces in Iraq at the start of 2007. His 35-year career started when he graduated from the United States Military Academy in 1974, graduating in the top 5% of his class. He was one of those cadets that had these gold stars on his collar, which I wondered what they were. He's held a broad range of command and staff assignments, including commanding at every level from platoon to his current position. General Petraeus is the ideal soldier scholar with a Ph.D. in international affairs from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School. He's highly decorated, including multiple awards of the Distinguished Service Medal and French Legion of Honor. In 2007, he was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential leaders of the year and one of 4 runner-ups for Time Person of the Year. Most recently, he was selected by Foreign Policy magazine as one of the world's top 100 public intellectuals and by Esquire magazine as one of the 75 most influential people of the 21st century. U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates has described General Petraeus as, and I quote, the preeminent soldier scholar statesman of his generation. He has also been described as a straight talker and a very highly thought of militarily. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming General Petraeus.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all very much. It's very kind of you to give us such a warm welcome here today. Marshall, thanks for those very kind words, although it brings to mind that the world is pretty desperate when an instrument is selected as one of the world's top intellectuals, I think. But it's great to be back in the Tar Heel State. A number of you here know that Holly and I had some wonderful assignments at the center of the military universe. That, of course, is Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I see Chuck Swanick over there, the former commander of the great 82nd Airborne Division, a whole host of others, including Bob Holcomb, who had great assignments there over the years, the head of the Ranger Group as well. And it's great to be back. In fact, when I was not assigned to Fort Bragg, at least other than when I was at Fort Campbell, that being the alternate center of the military universe, as the commander of the former commander of the 101st Airborne Division, I used to hear that James Taylor song, Carolina on My Mind, especially when performed by the great 82nd Airborne Division chorus. And I used to think about when I could next be assigned to the Tar Heel State. I must confess, though, that my vision at that time did not include the weather that you have outside here today. But it really is great to see so many old friends, battlefield comrades, and others here. It is very clear and very well known to all of us in uniform and those who have worn the uniform that this is a state and this is a city and a county that takes great care of its veterans. And in fact, I was discussing with the head of your local USO here what a tremendous service your USO at this airport, through which everyone seems to travel sooner or later, takes such good care of our military men and women. And so again, it is great to be back with you. It's also nice of you to have this Ranger sign right behind me here. Very hooah, I'll get the Ranger tab out there and convince them that it really is about the Ranger Regiment instead of the Ranger Group, although we thank you for sponsoring today. I want to recognize some of your leaders here. LJ, where did LJ go? There's LJ. Okay, thank you, LJ. Judging by your guest list, yep. We were looking at the list of folks who have spoken here and will speak here this year, and I must say this has to be about the busiest World Affairs Council chapter out there. And we're qualified to speak on that because I have spoken at a few of these over the years. In fact, I think in recent years I've been to Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. We've been to so many, in fact, that I said that, I thought perhaps my loyalty card might have enough stamps on it to get a T-shirt, and somebody from San Francisco sent us a T-shirt. Thanks to the mayor for being here earlier, and in his kind words, thanks to your county commissioner, again, for her kind words. Again, this is a community that is well known to all of us, and one to which it seems sometimes that half of America is trying to move. And so congratulations to all that you have accomplished here. I do want to thank the chairman of the chapter, Bob Holcomb, again, fellow West Point graduate, 1971. That means that he was a senior or firstie when I was a freshman or plebe. I do not hold that against you, Bob. I'm sure you never hazed me while I was a cadet. But there's at least, I think there are one or two members of the great class of 1974 who are here today. If you would please stand up and be recognized, class of 74. I do want to recognize one other individual here, Colonel Quincy Collins, U.S. Air Force retired. Where is he? Please stand up. It is very clear, it's very clear that his story is well known to all of you. But when we were reading it on the way here, I must say how impressed I was to hear of all that he did in our nation's uniform, including, of course, 7 years as a prisoner of war after being shot down over North Vietnam. He made incredible sacrifices for our country. He demonstrated enormous courage and fortitude, particularly during those tough years as a POW, and he brought great honor to himself, to our military, and to our country. And so again, sir, thank you for all that you went through and continue to do. Well, before we launch into what we call a conversation here, and it's that because that's what it is. I'll take your questions and respond as best I can. Of course, with the help of PowerPoint, there is a little asterisk on the First Amendment. It talks about how, freedom of speech and all the rest of this. And if you go down to the fine print, it says there that all 4-star U.S. Army generals have an inalienable right to use of PowerPoint when expressing their freedom of expression. And I'll do that. Also the right to a power pointer or laser pointer. But I wanted to pass on a story I heard on the way in here, actually. It has to do with a Walmart out on Galleria Boulevard that recently hired a new military retiree, one of those 60,000 you talked about, in this case to be a greeter. As the story goes, Charlie quickly established himself to be an exemplary employee, a wonderful greeter, very warm, very welcoming. But he just couldn't seem to get to work on time. Every day he was 5, 10, sometimes even 15 or 20 minutes late, and that started to cause problems. Finally, Charlie's boss felt that he had no alternative but to summon Charlie into the office for a talk. Charlie, his boss, said, "We're very impressed by the job you're doing, by your work, your attitude, your warmth toward our customers. You're a great greeter. But this coming in late all the time is starting to create issues." "Well, boss," Charlie responded, looking chagrined, I'm trying the best I can to show up on time, but it just hasn't been easy." "Well, you're a true team player and a great guy," Charlie's boss said, "so I'm glad you're working on being on time. It's odd, though. It's odd you're being late. Weren't you career military? What did folks used to say when you came in late when you were in uniform?" "Well," Charlie replied, "mostly they just stood up and said, 'Good morning, General.'" Coffee this morning, sir? Well, you know what you always have to say after one of those. Thanks for laughing. When you get to this point in life, you're only as good as the material they give you. Now, Bob, I think I will now offer you to come on up here, your chairman, who will begin the conversation, and I will allow him to ask the first two questions. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, General Petraeus. We certainly appreciate your coming today. And the way this will work, I will initiate two questions to General Petraeus, and we have some folks with microphones who are out in the audience. And as you formulate a question, if you'll let me know, I'll select you and we'll get a mic over to you so that everybody can hear your question and General Petraeus can respond. Let me start off by my first question to you, General Petraeus. Considering the increased unit deployments and short turnarounds due to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the strain on military service members and their family is likely the greatest it's ever been since when you entered the service in 1974. Considering this is true, how are the military families coping with this strain, and is it significant in trying to retain the career forces that we have?
Well, it's a wonderful question, one, again, that this state would have a lot of experience with. Of course, not just the Fort Bragg that's the center of the military universe. There's someplace called Camp Lejeune and a few other spots out there and a great Air Force base in this state as well, among others. The fact is we have asked a great deal of our men and women in uniform and of their families as well, and they have sacrificed enormously. I was at a combat outpost out in Afghanistan this past week, and as we often do, we did a re-enlistment ceremony and some promotions and awards, and probably had a couple hundred people there gathered around. And I asked for a show of hands of how many of those individuals, how many of those soldiers had spent 36 months or more, 3 years or more deployed in Iraq and or Afghanistan just since 9/11. And several dozen hands went up. In fact, I gave each of them a commander's coin. That is an example, again, of the kind of service and sacrifice that these young men and women have provided for our country. Having said that, re-enlistment is probably at all-time highs, and recruiting is also going extremely well. In fact, to the point that I think we've actually had to reduce some of the bonuses for both of those. And we are now, thankfully, touch wood, being able to lengthen the times between deployment. There was a period, as you'll recall, during the surge in Iraq, in fact, where we had to lengthen all deployments. Everybody downrange went from spending 12 months to 15 months on that particular work. And then we were turning units as fast as 1 year back and 1 year back over in the deployment areas. We're now well into the 18-month period for dwell times, it's called, and frankly, quite a few units have a good bit more than that. There are a number of units, depending on the different categories of them out there, that are up in the 2-year mark. And that's very, very helpful, very healthy, obviously. And it's a result, frankly, of our being able to draw down our forces in Iraq. We're down around 96,000 or so now, headed to 50,000 by the end of August, and touch wood, again, we think that that is on track as well, with the elections coming up there on the 7th of March, and we'll see how that goes and what the aftermath is. We are indeed ramping up in Afghanistan, 30,000 additional forces. We're about 4,500 of that deployment already in country and already in operation. But again, we think we can do all of that. It is doable, we believe. Our men and women in uniform have continued to raise their right hands to re-enlist and to enlist in very substantial numbers, and I'll show a photo of what is the largest re-enlistment ceremony in our history when I close out here today. So it has not been easy. You know, wives like Holly have been through a great deal. There are a lot of Mrs. Dads out there. You know, she was, in a sense, father as well as mother for our kids for something like 5.5 years since 9/11 alone. Many others like that out there. We can all be very thankful for them. And more importantly, I think we can do what you all have done so admirably well, and that is show your support for our men and women in uniform in such a wonderful and generous fashion. That means everything to them. And as I'll mention when I wrap up, there is nothing that matters more to them than knowing that they're appreciated by their fellow citizens and realizing that they're performing missions of enormous importance to our country.
Thank you. Second question I have is, in Iraq and Afghanistan, where it's difficult to distinguish between friend and foe, and the insurgents routinely hide among the general population, how do the rules of engagements deal with this situation?
Well, first of all, of course, you're never, ever denied the right of self-defense. I mean, just for starters. So if somebody shoots at you, you shoot back. And, it's reasonably easy, at least, to know who that person is, although they can blend into the population or into the terrain pretty quickly. Having said that, we have worked very, very hard in recent years to take the rules of engagement that we do have and apply them in a fashion that reduces the possibility of loss of innocent civilian life. The fact is that we'd reached a point in Afghanistan in particular last spring where we were having what were termed tactical successes. We were killing dozens of bad guys, Taliban in particular engagements, but we were also killing innocent civilians in the course of those engagements. And so what was seen as a tactical success or victory on the ground actually was a strategic setback in Kabul and indeed in the court of public opinion, which is hugely important. General McChrystal, actually General McKiernan before him, and then General McChrystal, our commanders in Afghanistan, developed what are called tactical guidance, tactical directives that have governed the use of force in a way that, again, doesn't end up with our troopers fighting with a hand behind their back, but it does indeed remind them that if you can back out of a fight that's ambiguous and avoid dropping a bomb on a house if you don't know precisely who's in it, then you should do that. On the other hand, if you're decisively engaged, if you're getting hammered, then obviously you do what is necessary to defend yourself and your troops. This is hugely important. Again, this war has gone on a long time. Afghanistan in particular is either now our longest war or soon will be. The people have been in a state of war there for a long time in the areas that are most challenged. And we have to do everything possible to make sure that we limit the chances of loss of innocent life and that they know that we are doing that as well. And oh, by the way, what we then want to do is hang around the neck of the Taliban the label of indiscriminate violence, because they are increasingly the source of far more civilian casualties than we are. We have dramatically reduced innocent civilian loss of life, although it is still there, and tragically on a battlefield, it is inevitable that there will be some of that, even as we try to drive it down to zero.
All right. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions from the floor. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone out to you. Shirley, we have a question over here. Go ahead.
Sir, I'll ask you an Army question. I spent 37 years in the Army, but my first thing I have to say is a lot of people in America are hoping you run for president, but no comment is expected.
If I could, I do need to comment, because I won't be. We were in Nashville yesterday. I was reminded of the great Lori Morgan, wonderful singer who used to sing a song that went something like, "What about no, don't you understand?"
My question, sir, is some European, like the British Army, rotates their units by units. Whereas in the United States Army, we've been rotating them as individuals into the slots.
Not
and
anymore.
There's talk, I understand, about changing that. Could you comment, please?
We have changed it. In fact, we changed it when we began the operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. So Chuck Swanwick and I deployed together as division commanders with our forces. We deployed them, we brought them home. We have indeed changed the structure that is the base piece. It used to be that we literally deployed an entire division or the bulk of it. We're now rotating brigades with division headquarters moving sometimes separately from their organic brigades. But no, sir, we have gone to a unit rotation. We think it is hugely important because of the cohesion that exists in a unit that has trained together often for a year and a half before deploying. We have worked very hard to get the preparation for Afghanistan, the preparation for Iraq to be very finely tuned so that it prepares our soldiers for what they'll experience there. If you go out, for example, to the National Training Center in the Mojave Desert now, it's no longer the clash of titans, the big mechanized and armored forces fighting it out in the central corridor of Fort Irwin, California. It is now continuous, complex counterinsurgency with hundreds of native-speaking Iraqi-American or Afghan-American role players out there, hundreds of soldiers replicating everything from suicide bombers to host nation forces to market owners and everything else. So we've worked very hard, actually, and you've put your finger on something that is hugely important, and that is the foundation for everything we do. That's the relationship among those in the brotherhood of the close fight in particular, those small units that are outside the wire, turning big ideas from guys like me into reality on the ground. And indeed, we've gone to a unit rotation, and we will stay with that. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question over here on the to my left, your right.
Welcome to Charlotte, sir. I'd like to ask, as far as the negotiations that are going on with Iran and all that's going on with their pursuit of a nuclear program, how is that affecting what we're trying to accomplish elsewhere in the region, and how is that affecting your command?
Well, in fact, I was asked by Christiane Amanpour a couple Sundays ago on CNN. You know, she asked me, "Now, General, could you tell me about your specific plans to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons?" And I said, well, probably wouldn't be very productive to go into much detail on that. But what I did say is that, of course, military commanders, you know, there are 6 geographic combatant commanders that America has. What we get paid to do, what America expects us to do, what the commander-in-chief charges us to do, is to prepare for what-ifs, to have contingency plans. And so I mentioned to Christiane that it would be literally irresponsible if we weren't planning for various what-ifs out there, and that is indeed the case. We try not to be irresponsible. The fact is that Iran, in some respects, and President Ahmadinejad personally, is the best recruiting officer that Central Command has. His rhetoric, the alarming actions of Iran, the continued funding, arming, training, and equipping of extremist elements in southern Iraq, in southern Lebanon, in Gaza, and to a much lesser degree, western Afghanistan. These actions are of enormous concern, as you might imagine, to the states in the region. So are the activities that are part of the nuclear program that Iran has carried forward. And indeed, those actions have resulted in a number of the countries there, frankly, embracing Central Command in ways that was not the case prior to just a couple of years ago. So there's a big concern about that out there. We, again, are working with our partners to ensure prudent defensive measures are in place and all the rest of that. And indeed, Iran's activities tend to give those countries even greater impetus than they otherwise might have.
Okay, thank you. We have a question right here. 1 second, Mike's coming to you. Please, yeah, stand up, please.
Regarding Iran, what do you think the likelihood of Israel attacking Iran, and what would be the American response to that?
Would you like the specific version or the general version? Let me, if I could just put this in context, actually, because I think it's important to do that. I think over the course of the past year, the United States rightly has pursued the diplomatic track. It has literally extended an open hand, as the term has been used, to Iran. It's worked that very hard. It has given Iran every opportunity to grasp that hand, to engage in true dialogue and discussion, and to reach diplomatic solutions to the issues that confront the region and the world as a result of some of Iran's activities, particularly, again, in the nuclear area, as judged by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN body. And Iran has not taken advantage of that. It has not capitalized on that opportunity. Now, that has also, though, put the United States and other like-minded countries in a position where no one in the world can say that we have not given Iran every opportunity, again, to resolve these through talks. And so you now see a transition to what is termed the pressure track, as Secretary Clinton has described it, as the President has described it. And this is a track in which actions to include sanctions, tougher sanctions, are being considered by the UN Security Council and by the permanent members of that body in particular. That's where we are right now. We'll see how that moves along in the course of the weeks ahead. The IAEA also has been engaged, just issued another report which expresses considerable concern as well. And again, as I said, you see dynamics in the region ongoing also in response to the activities that I described earlier. So that's where we are. Now, I personally think this can stretch a bit longer for what it's worth. We have looked at timelines. We know the components of various activities, of various programs. And it's our hope, frankly, that the pressure track, that the sanctions and perhaps additional diplomacy can bring some reason to this effort. And that's the focus right now, frankly. Thanks.
Okay, question right here. Yeah, the gentleman. There you go. Megan, yeah. Alex, yeah, if you could get a microphone to him, please. We got about 3 microphones converging on him. All right.
General Petraeus, I'd like to switch to Afghanistan and the current surge and the surge strategy. Our troops in the field, whether it's a private or a general, are obviously doing an excellent job with the commands that they've been given and the tasks that they've been given. In Marja, we announced that we were coming in, so as a result, perhaps the baddest of the bad guys got out of town and left a rear guard. And our troops are doing a wonderful job of seizing the territory. But at the same time, it looks like we're not killing the bad guys, and maybe they're just moving on to other towns to take up place there. Can you comment on that?
Sure, yeah. First of all, the reason that we announced what we were going to do in Marja ahead of time was so that we wouldn't have to destroy Marja to save it by getting in a big slugfest the way, frankly, we did a couple of different times in liberating some cities in Iraq that had become safe havens for the al-Qaeda elements that were in Iraq. And indeed, we've killed boatloads of bad guys in Afghanistan. For what it's worth, you don't kill or capture your way out of this kind of problem. You have to do that, don't get me wrong, and we're not at all shrinking. That's what people in uniform uniquely can do and do. And we are indeed sending in additional special mission units from Fort Bragg and elsewhere, in addition to the conventional forces, in addition to the special forces that are pursuing local defense initiatives, in addition to the civilians who are engaging in governance, development, local establishment, revival of markets and schools and all the rest of that. So we're doing this across the board, and additional trainers and advisors to the Afghan National Security Force is a critical element of the overall effort. But the fact is that we sat down, General McChrystal looked hard at Marja and said, okay, you know, we could try to achieve surprise, we could trap them all in there, we can get in a heck of a fight in Marja, and we will do colossal damage to a town that has not got a heck of a lot to begin with. And probably better to let some of the baddest of them go out the back door. We'll track them down if they stay irreconcilable. And then the others, what you do is they had a big Shura Council there yesterday. In fact, we did a video teleconference with General McChrystal and his team this morning, Secretary of Defense and others. And he explained where we are. This has been a very deliberate, methodical campaign. We're about 2 weeks into it now. They're starting to approach what's called the hold and build phase of the operation, having done the bulk of the clearance phase, but the enemy's still in there in some cases. They'll come around, they'll feel our edges literally, they'll plan improvised explosive devices. It's important to point out, in fact, again, let me put Afghanistan in context if I could. And I might call up, if we can pull the puzzle slide up for Afghanistan. I got to test the team here. Boy, they are on their game. What we've done over the course of the last year is we have gotten the inputs right for Afghanistan in several different areas. We knew what we needed to have in terms of organizational structures and elements from our experience in Iraq. We know what is required for a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign. We did not have that in Afghanistan, so we set about building it. And this list right here shows the structures that we put together. First of all, the 4-star wasn't even the U.S. 4-star. It's just a NATO 4-star. So we dual-hatted General McKiernan and then General McChrystal. The Joint Command is the 3-star operational level headquarters, the equivalent of multinational Corps Iraq. Didn't have that. Now Lieutenant General Rodriguez, former 82nd Airborne Division commander who's also served in Afghanistan in that role, is the command of that. Stood up the NATO training mission in Afghanistan. 3-star General Caldwell, former Fort Bragg guy, in charge of that. Rule of Law Task Force, didn't have that on the ground. Didn't have an Information Operations Task Force. Got unity of effort in the Special Ops arena. Intel fusion cells, hugely important, and so forth. So we got the structures right. Then we tried to get the all-star team to be in charge of them. And all these individuals right here, a lot of them, by the way, with time in Iraq. General McChrystal commanded JSOC there, of course, headquartered at Fort Bragg. Stefan de Mistura was the UN Special Representative in Iraq. Now he's in Afghanistan. All of these other individuals had time in Iraq. Admiral Smith stood up the Information Operation Task Force in Iraq. His reward is now he gets to do that in Afghanistan. And we also have a reintegration cell, hugely important right here, because if you're going to do reintegration of reconcilables, because again, you're not going to kill or capture everybody. You have to reconcile with those that you can, just as we did in Iraq in the wake of the Anbar Awakening. You got to have a team to do that. We didn't, we do now. Then, if you go to the next element, then you got to get the big ideas right. So General McChrystal and his civilian counterparts pulled together a civil-military campaign plan. They got unity of effort between the civil-military components of this, counterinsurgency guidance, the tactical directive I talked about on the use of close air support and indirect fires, reintegration. Now we have some guidance on that out there, and a host of other, again, of the so-called big ideas. And then finally, through the process that was led by the President, the Afghan-Pakistan review, we got the additional resources. Now we, of course, added to Iraq some 38,000 just during the course of last year. Now the additional 30,000 are flowing, as I mentioned, 4,500 of which are already there. There's also now over 8,000 NATO forces committed. Got tripling the number of civilians on the ground, additional resources to enable 100,000 more Afghan security forces, and on and on. So this has been getting the inputs right, and it took us about a year to do that, and you're now seeing just the initial operations that constitute output, because this is a 12 to 18-month campaign that we're embarking on. It is not going to be easy. In Iraq, as you'll recall, when we did the surge and we fought to take away sanctuaries and safe havens from the bad guys, they fight back. There are tough losses during those times. This is going to be a hard year. Indeed, there's nothing easy about Afghanistan, as I think you all know. For what it's worth, I was sent there in September 2005 on the way home from a second tour in Iraq at Secretary Rumsfeld's request to do an assessment of a variety of activities there. And I came back and told him that was when Afghanistan was really going very, very well in a lot of minds. It was the, quote, war we were winning, the good war, in contrast at that time to Iraq. And I came back and said that with respect, Mr. Secretary, this is going to be the longest campaign in what we then termed the long war. But having said all that and providing a dose of reality, because I don't do optimism or pessimism. I do realism at this point in time after having been at this for so long. Having given that, this is a hugely important endeavor. There is no question that the 9/11 attacks were planned in Kandahar in southern Afghanistan, that the initial training of the attackers was conducted in eastern Afghanistan before they went to Germany and then on to U.S. flight schools. We cannot let Afghanistan be a sanctuary or safe haven again for al-Qaeda or other transnational extremists. So that gives you a sense of where this all fits.
Thank you. Megan, you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, General. This is a comment as opposed to a question. I'm the father of a first lieutenant who's the S2 for an Apache helicopter battalion that's currently deployed. And I would just like to thank you for your leadership, sir. It sure means a lot.
Well, thanks. It's a privilege to serve.
Okay, we have a question back here in the back. Alex?
Good afternoon, General. I'm Jesse Tillman. I just returned this past summer from being a member of your staff and also Admiral Gordney's staff. As a part of that, as a part of being a part of a planning effort, I had the opportunity to travel all over the theater and speak to a lot of military people from our different allies and the folks that are working with us. One of the things that was repeated to me over and over again was the perception, and I say perception, that the United States is overextended operationally as well as financially, and that was impacting our operations and our ability to be successful. Sir, my question to you is, is that a valid perception, and does the United States financial affairs, do you believe, impact our ability to be successful?
Yeah, let me answer both of those. First of all, operationally, militarily, again, as I mentioned earlier, there is no question but that we have asked a great deal of those who are in uniform and of their families. Having said that, as you saw when we had to do the Haiti relief operation recently, in fact, we had a brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division. It was sitting, waiting. It was called the Global Response Force. It deployed. 18th Airborne Corps provided the headquarters for that operation as well. And frankly, we were able to do that. By the way, we were able to continue the surge of forces into Afghanistan, which is taking about every wide-body aircraft that we have, because we're sending a lot of these mine-resistant, armor-protected vehicles in the MRAPs at the same time. But we were still able to do the relief effort there. Again, asking a great deal of our military, but it is not overstretched. And as you know from your time on the great Vice Admiral Gordney's staff, so named because he's about 5'1", and the Navy is always cruel with their call signs for their aviators. But the great Shortney Gordney is got a variety of contingency plans out there, as you well know, and they use elements of our force that are not engaged right now and would be available if we had to employ them. The financial piece is something, I mean, I'm talking before a room of individuals in the second most important financial capital of our country, and so I need to be a little bit sensitive to that. But I mean, clearly we've got to work on the fiscal and trade deficits and so forth as a former economist. But again, I think there's attention to that. There's a recognition of the importance of doing that, but of doing it in a way, obviously, that doesn't stall the recovery that, touch wood, we hope has begun. So, you know, we go around out there. I think they're watching very carefully what does happen and how we are responding in both of these areas that you raise. But I think, you know, there's no other military, if you combined all the rest, actually, that have the capabilities that our forces have, and that now have unparalleled levels of experience. With all respect to those who have worn the uniform in here in the past and may have served in combat while wearing that uniform, we've never had a force that is remotely as experienced as the force that wears the uniform right now.
All right, thank you. Megan, you have a question here?
General, following the fall of Iraq, the New York Times reported you writing a letter to General Sultan Hashim Ahmed, who was the field commander in charge of the Al-Anfal genocide campaign, in which you described him as, quote, a man of honor and courage. Could you comment on the accuracy of that reporting, and if so, could you explain those remarks?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. He was the Minister of Defense of Iraq at the time that we conducted the operation into Iraq, toppled Saddam, and so forth. And for what it's worth, he was about the only senior figure who was seen by his fellow Iraqis as being not a Saddamist, not in the inner circle of Saddam's regime, despite his role, as a lot of the military did, in a variety of operations that we rightly view as reprehensible. And again, there's some debating that can go on. You can argue the history of where he was during the Anfal campaign and a few other things like that. The point was that what I was trying to do was get him to come in with his hands up rather than to have us have to go into a house or something like that with guns blazing. And in fact, which we did do, of course, when we killed Uday and Kusay in the 101st Airborne Division area up in Mosul. And in fact, it succeeded. And he contacted me through an intermediary, said that he was willing to surrender to me personally, which he did. That was a good thing for Iraq. It was a good thing for our forces. And I then delivered him to the authorities in Baghdad, where he's been ever since, actually. And he has been brought up on charges. He is actually pending the death penalty. We'll see if that is executed or not over time. But I've shared that letter with others over time and would stand by it. Thanks.
Okay, other questions? We have a question over here. All right, Alex.
I too will echo the thoughts about thank you very much for coming here. And one of the opportunities your coming here gives us is to get the knowledge that you have of the background conditions. We have more reporting in the last year about Afghanistan, but they all repeat each other, and it's really pretty shallow, maybe a mile wide, but very shallow. One of the areas that's not covered very much is ethnicity. And I'd like to pick out a question, just ask your background on the issue of the Baluch. I had to go back to a book from the 1960s to confirm my understanding that there are a number of Baluch in the southern part of Afghanistan where we're now fighting. And with their territory going all the way from Quetta to Iran, this seems like this is an important background force. I think most Americans unaware the answers to a series of questions. Where do the Baluch stand? Are they favorable to the Taliban like the Pashtuns are in the extreme east of Afghanistan? Or do they support and are they helping the Afghan government? About the protection of Mullah Omar, who up until just very recently was said to be in Quetta in Baluch territory. Did the Pakistanis and did we not go after him there because of Baluch support or because of Pakistani support? What's the politics there? And finally,
Wait, we got too many. You got too many questions here. Give the general an opportunity to comment.
There's a whole bunch of issues that you've just wrapped up. First of all, there's no question that ethnicity plays a major part in what is going on in Iraq. And as you walk your way around the country, and there are Turkmen and Uzbeks and Hazaras and a whole host of others, in addition to the Pashtu, who are the bulk of the so-called Taliban insurgency. The Taliban really being just one element of a syndicate of extremist elements that are actually carrying out the insurgency in Afghanistan. The bulk of that, again, is the Pashtu. It's not really the Baluch. The Baluch mostly centered in the southwestern province or state of Pakistan, with Quetta indeed as the capital of that area. I would argue that there are more challenges with respect to Baluchi nationalism for Pakistan, certainly by far, than they are for Afghanistan. With respect to the fact that the Taliban is moving around, they weren't in Quetta itself, they're in the outskirts of it, is our sense. There is no question that there are sanctuaries and safe havens that all elements of the different extremist groups in Pakistan, they are there. They are generally in fairly remote areas, however. And if there is any big development that I would highlight to you over the course of the last year or so, it's that about 10 months ago, in a truly strategic shift, the Pakistani people, all of their political leaders, including the major opposition figures, Nawaz Sharif and others, and the bulk of the clerics, all came to recognize the existential threat posed to their country by the Pakistani Taliban. It's a slight distinction from the Afghan Taliban, to be sure, although they're all, again, part of this syndicate. And at the end of this, I'll show a slide that just shows you these different groups and the granularity with which we have in our assessment of them. But this shift has truly been important because the Pakistani military, the Army, the Frontier Corps, supported by their Air Force, have gone into Swat district of the Northwest Frontier Province, have gone into the other areas of the so-called Malakan Division. In fact, I was there last week in both Upper and Lower Swat Valley, very, very significant development. And the same with the operations they've carried out in eastern South Waziristan, where the Masood tribal organization, that's the element, the extremist element that killed Benazir Bhutto, has killed so many thousands, literally, of Pakistani military, security forces, innocent civilians, visiting cricket teams, you name it. They have carried out horrific attacks. And they too need to have hung around their neck the label of indiscriminate violence, extremist ideology, and oppressive practices. They want to turn the clock back several centuries. The Pakistani people have come to recognize that and the threat that it poses to the very existence of the state as they currently know it. They don't want to see that happen, and they have been combating it. Maybe you could put up a slide that just shows the locations here. This gives you, again, here's Islamabad, of course, this is Afghanistan, over here Kabul. Of course, the road runs through the Khyber Pass there west of Peshawar. But here is where Swat District, Swat Valley is, this incredibly picturesque. We were there, as I said, it's about 1.5 feet of packed snow when we were there the other day last week. And that is an area that had come under the control of the Pakistani Taliban. The Pakistani forces now have secured, they have cleared, and they're holding that area. There are still threats without question. There had been an attack the day before we were in the capital, Mingora, of Swat District. But they are really doing quite admirable work there, and I would describe it as classic counterinsurgency operations. They're operating in Bajor right now. They've done operations in Momand and Khyber as well. There's some more that they'll do there. In eastern South Waziristan, very importantly, have cleared and held the area that was formerly Baitullah Masood, who was killed there last year, as you may recall, along with a number of other very senior extremist leaders in a variety of campaigns. There have been operations in North Waziristan contrary to popular perception, and there have also been operations in some of these others, although again it's been concentrated up in the Northwest Frontier Province and the northern parts of the federally administered tribal areas and down in eastern South Waziristan. That is a very, very significant development. The challenge for the Pakistanis, though, is that having put a lot of short sticks into a lot of bad hornets' nests, there's a limit to how much more of that you can do. And what they're trying to do is consolidate some of their gains to assess the way forward, to determine what the dynamics are, frankly. You have to remember, by the way, that we have left the Pakistani people 3 times before, and we need to be seen as constant friends and partners. We need to demonstrate sustained, substantial commitment and not do what we did in the wake of Charlie Wilson's war and pull stakes and leave them with the holding the bag. They're keenly aware of that. This is their strategic depth, with India being right out over here, of course. It's a very narrow country where you look at it. And so those are the dynamics that are ongoing there. Certainly, ethnicity is a key part of that as you look at the various parts of Pakistan, Baluchi, Punjab, and so forth. And certainly within Afghanistan, you see ethnicities playing a very important role as well. We've worked hard to try to get a grip on that. If you can show the slide that shows the extremist elements. This is a complicated slide, if we can pull it up here, just because it's got a lot of acronyms on it because of the number of different extremist elements that are there. If you can't pull it up, just let me, not that one. It's the one of Afghanistan that shows the different extremist elements. This shows, by the way, where Al-Qaeda's tentacles run. This shows the enemy in Afghanistan. And down in the south, in the purple area, you have the Afghan Taliban. You see there, by the way, Baluchistan that you referred to. Quetta's right down in here. You then work your way up. You have Commander Nazir, the Haqqani Network, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the Pakistani Taliban, the HIG, the HIC, Al-Qaeda itself. Al-Qaeda's senior leadership is in the federally administered tribal areas. You can see it's mostly, though, in the eastern part of the country and then the southern part. And again, you see that it is made up of a number of different groups. But as Secretary Gates described very effectively in his testimony in the wake of the President's policy announcement at West Point, there's a symbiotic relationship between these groups. And we have to be careful not to try to parse too finely the distinction between the Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the other extremist elements that we show right there.
All right, I think we have time only for one more question. Megan, you have a...
Thank you, General, for being here today with us. I had a question about, there are a number of capable, competent, and valiant young men and women who served our country so well, it appears that the Israelis are much better at utilizing these returning veterans and giving them positions of power, prestige, and opportunities in business. What message do you have for American business welcoming back these veterans and helping them integrate them back into our society?
In fact, tonight we're going up to New York City, and my wife and I are going to participate in a dinner called Help USA. And it is an organization that works to support those veterans, frankly, who are most in need. Those who have entered a downward spiral upon returning, say, from a deployment or something like that. And a lot of other wonderful groups like that. And when people ask me, what can we do to help? I would say find an existing organization, pile on, help Wounded Warriors, Disabled Sports USA, No Greater Sacrifice, or a number of very wonderful Fisher Foundation, of course, that has the Fisher Houses at Fort Bragg and a variety of other places. Having said all that, I might gently take issue with you that our returning military or our veterans don't end up in prominent positions. As I look at the chairman, president, and CEO of Goodrich Corporation, I look at a whole table full of executives, every one of whom graduated from West Point, I might add, in fact, not just having served their country. In fact, if I could actually ask everybody in here who served in the military and is now, say, over the age of 40, just to get a sense of the executives in the room. Could you all stand up, please? So I would offer perhaps that I think our country does a pretty darn good job at recognizing the qualities when it comes to leadership and integrity and character and initiative, innovativeness, courage, moral as well as physical, all of the qualities that we prize on the battlefield, frankly, that we prize in these institutions, these assets, national assets that are your Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, that they are recognized in business as well, and I think certainly that appears to be the case here. I perhaps might just go ahead and wrap up then, Bob, and if I promised I'd show you one final slide. We often do this at presentations like this. This is a slide of a re-enlistment ceremony. It was the 4th of July, 2008. Great Command Sergeant Major Marvin Hill, been with me several different times. We've been air assault wingmen of each other. And I sat down a couple months prior to this event and said, it'd be great to have a little re-enlistment ceremony, get maybe a couple hundred of our troopers out there on the floor, which we'd done the previous year and done some times before in Iraq when we were together. And lo and behold, he came to me a few weeks before the event and he said, hey, sir, we got a problem on our hands. I said, geez, what's that? We're not getting folks signing up to re-enlist this summer? He said, no, we have far too many. I said, how can we have too many? He said, well, we got 700 and climbing. I said, whoa, that's a logistical challenge, but I think we're equal to it. We ended up with 1,215 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, raising their right hand, reciting the oath of enlistment, and committing themselves to another tour in uniform. Now, what is extraordinary about this? First of all, this is before the economic downturn. This is, by the way, they're not doing it for the stock options. This is before, again, that downturn and so on. They were doing this, many of them, again, on their third full year tour in combat, some of those 15-monthers, because this is the tail end of the surge. And they were raising their right hand knowing that they would likely be asked to deploy again by the act of raising that right hand. And you sometimes ask yourself, where do you find individuals like this? What is it that prompts them to do this? And I will tell you that what prompts them to do that is their fierce desire not to let down their buddies on their right and left, their sense that they are serving some mission, cause larger than self, and their awareness, as I mentioned earlier, of the tremendous support and backing by the American citizens, regardless of their views of some of the endeavors that we have undertaken since 9/11. There are few groups in America that do that better than this city, than this state. And so I'm really here today on behalf of those individuals to tell you what a privilege it has been to spend time with you, and more importantly, on their behalf, to say thank you for your great support of them and of their families. Thank you very much.